Hello, my friends. Well, it is morning here, as you can see by the sunlight. It's hard to do this in the camera. It's kind of backwards. Today we are going to be attempting to finish the last chapters in the third book of the Singer trilogy called The Finale. So we have done all the way through chapter 13 of The Finale. And so here we go, chapter 14. When comes that final frantic marathon that you did not elect to run, may there be wild flowers in your path. Pray that your flight be not in winter, son. Dreamer thanked Invader for his presence. He was grateful that his unseen friend would not abandon him now that the hour of flight had come. Dreamer pulled his coat about him and started down the passageway. At the far end was a shaft that bore 1,000 feet of ladders in poor repair. Dreamer's fear of the breaches in the rungs was less intense than his hunger to be free. Looking up, he saw a tiny speck of light. It was the opening above. The laddered shaft had been a tomb for miners who had tried escape and failed. But youth was on his side, and his disciplined young legs would provide strength for the climb. 300 feet above, the walls opened outward on a cavern where the canisters of death ore were stacked. When he passed the arsenals, the sentries' heads were turned away. He moved silently on to chambers above, cheered by the invader's presence. He thought of Lifeland's army following the winged Invictrix, even now the skyway into Terra. Even now down the skyway into Terra. The spot of light grew larger. He spanned a treacherous section, a broken ladder, bars, and passed another room where torches burned. Here was the chamber where Elan and the Prince of Mirrors had lately traded loyalty and faces. On he climbed. The light grew. His legs were now so weary they trembled. At last he came to a Vulcan's lair and descended through a darkened corner of its cavern. In the flickering torches he saw the hideous beast, far too close at hand, feeding on a trophy. The smell of fetid flesh was heavy in the chamber. For a moment Dreamer thought the Vulcan saw him. The beast snorted, held up its scaly head, and stared at the ladder shaft. Dreamer's heart stopped. 2 sentries, undisturbed, dragged up another carcass. The dragon lowered its head and ate. Dreamer passed on. Above the Vulcan cavern, the shaft opened onto a mountaintop. Dreamer blinked in the brilliant sunlight. The mountains were alive with crystalline magnificence. But Dreamer had no time to admire the morning. A single sentry barred his way. He thought he might slip quietly behind the guard, gaining the ledges undetected. But as he stepped from the ladder portions, the new snow crunched beneath his feet. The sentry wheeled. Dreamer was discovered. The startled sentry lunged, but Dreamer stepped adroitly to the side. His assailant fell too near the opening of the shaft, and only the ladder points could break his fall. He tried in vain to grasp the wooden post, but his heavy gloves would not let his fingers grasp his hopes. He slid past the posts, clawing helplessly. First at the ladder, then at the air. His scream echoed down the cavern shafts. Dreamer knew the wail would rouse the Vulcan feeding just below. He hurried down the sunny, icy trail along the ledges, which would lead him to the steps of Varge and Thade. In spite of his fatigue, his legs found strength. His feet fell firmly on the snowy trail. The morning ledges were steep but comfortable. His fear of pursuit left him. The sentry lay undiscovered at the bottom of the shaft. By afternoon, the descent became treacherous. He sensed the coming of a storm. Then the trail turned upward, and he had to climb an outcropping of granite glistening with ice. While he hung upon the wall like a frozen insect, a Vulcan scream caused his flesh to crawl. He dropped quickly upon a ledge and pulled his aching torso beneath a stony overhang. Flattened against the wall, he watched the Vulcan pass. Its scaly wings throbbed thunder as it flew toward the steps of Varge and Thade. Dreamer's fear was intense, but groundless. The Vulcan was not seeking him. Only when the dragon passed could he notice that two men rode the saddle on its neck. He could not see their faces, but the second wore a black cape that fluttered in the air, and the fabric underneath the fluttering cloak was frayed. Chapter 15. Conflict is the habit of the ages. War's amputees sire children eager to mature and take their bloody turn at death. "Sir," a sentry said, "there are reports an army is advancing toward the plains of Man." "From where? What his cities?" Elan asked. "From none we know," the guard replied. "By horse or foot?" "Both. Horsemen first, followed by an infantry of magnitude." "Then send the Vulcans. We'll set the cities blazing in their path. The fire will turn the rebels back." "They are said to be a buoyant army," the sentry offered. "Buoyant?" Elan seemed puzzled. "Buoyant," the sentry repeated. "They sing as they march." "What about their marching makes them sing?" "The words, sir, have to do with the crowning of some singer as their universal king." "The singer!" cried Elan. "We sealed his gilded temples." "We have. Many have been burned." "And still his superstition lives?" said Elan in disbelief. "They sing of him, this army. A general leads them. His horse is said to be so white that he appears to be illuminated from within." "Send the Vulcans. Burn cities in their path." The courier left. From high in the crystal range the Vulcans flew. East of the plains of Man, 20 cities burned. Elan was sure the burning cities would repel the rebel horde, if such a horde existed. The Prince of Mirrors was undaunted by rumors of a coming war. He preached his doctrine of the glass in the capital, as he had preached it throughout the troubled provinces. By now the insignia and seal were everywhere. Invader forbade Singarians to accept or wear the chain. Their disdain of mirrors and the prince was widely known. So persecution came. Those who refused the mirror and the seal were put in prison. When Singarians would obtain bread from the prison larders, they crushed the loaves and ate the singer's meal. Beyond the prison walls, men smashed mirrors and laid by the seal of Elan. Each month, thousands cried out to be unchained and received the stigmon, as Terra's men had done in every generation. The prisons quickly filled and overflowed to improvised detention centers and temporary workhouses. Elan began a curious plan. The temples of the troubadour were many, for Singarians had thrived in freer days. Elon ordered the gilded temples converted into prisons. Windows were barred and doors were bolted. Singarians were imprisoned where once they were most free. Their liberation, Elon said, would be an easy matter. They had only to take the chain and publicly profess the doctrine of the glass. "Do you believe the singer lives on?" said Elon to the Prince of Mirrors. "He never lived," the world-hater replied. "Yet they say he's coming down some magic skyway and soon sets foot on Terra. It is the hopeless tale of the oppressed. Every desperate age invents messiahs," said the prince. "But were it true," Elon hesitated, "were the troubadour alive and the general of an alien horde, could he be stopped with Volcans or armies?" "I can't say. Men have talked for centuries about a war of fire. The old Singarians have it written in a book called The Finale. But why be troubled if the singer stood now upon the plains of man? Would you surrender or fight?" "I'd fight," shouted Elon. "I'd give him such a thrashing in the flames." "Then I cannot see that it matters if the rumor's true or not. I've burned a score of cities already. I think it is an idle tale. Still thousands have perished to show him my force, should it indeed be him who leads this fabled host." They walked together as they talked, and soon were along the balustrade above the royal residence. "Are you afraid, Elon?" the Prince of Mirrors asked. "No. Still I must go to the plains of man and see if this army exists." A Volcan winged above the city. Its ugly head dipped low above the royal buildings. Its teeth were parted. The scaly plates of its abdomen were corroded brass. Its 6 deadly claws were ready for the bidding of its lord. Its 6 wings brought a turbulence like thunder. It came to rest upon a marble finial and became a gargoyle on the palace. Wall, grinning at the people far below. Elon beckoned. The reptile left its perch and flew to him. He placed his foot upon a heavy wing and climbed across the dorsal scales. He sat down in the saddle on the grotesque neck. The dragon moved into the air and soared above the smoke of 20 cities. Chapter 16. "Goodbye, cruel world," his letter said, pinned to his shirt above the red. The world was cruel. We wondered why he felt he had to say goodbye. Dreamer shivered in the cold. The moon was bright, and he decided to move rather than sleep in snow and ice. He knew the troubadour was either on the skyway or this very planet where he trembled in the cold. The trail turned down again. The frozen air stung his face. By dawn of the second day, he knew that he had to rest. Desire had driven him to fatigue that could no longer be ignored. The steps were still 3 days away. But the worst part of the trip was behind. The slopes became gentle, the cold less severe. He rested in a sunny place. There was no wind. The morning sun felt warm. He slept without awareness of the altitude and cold. His sleep erupted suddenly in cyclone colors. The streets of Lifeland were empty. While his weary flesh slumbered on the trail, he ran down the avenue of obelisks across the Phoenix's court. The gates were open, and the Army of the Liberation was so far down the skyway they could not be seen. Dreamer was ecstatic. The singer might be on the plains of man. A A new excitement claimed him. The invasion might come while he slept upon the trail. There was a little point in staying longer. Lifeland did not exist without the singer. Dreamer did not rest. He opened his eyes, stood, then hurried forward into the afternoon. At sunrise of the third day, he lay and slept as invaders stirred within. Sleep had lost desire and would not transport him to empty streets. But he had a different kind of dream. He dreamed of a stable where a black horse stood, waiting while a man in black clothes ground his sword upon an emery wheel. The sparks flew in Dreamer's mind. He recognized the Titan knight and toiled at the wheel as the Prince of Mirrors. Dreamer knew that the crude stable would be his first stop in the capital of Eleanor, though he knew not why, nor was he sure why invaders showed him this, but he trusted Inner Light. When he awoke, his feet sped with lightness, as did the days upon the lower ledges of his flight. Finally, he came to the steps of Varge and Thade. They had been the first to suffer in the war of fire. Now 20 other cities to the east were smoldering in death. When Dreamer saw the carnage, he wept. Varge and Thade were dead, whole cities gone. Only ashes where once the children played and sang their rhymes. 7 princes on the spire, 7 diamonds in the mire, 7 volcans dropping fire on the burning forest. Who keeps the dragons in their lairs? Elon, Lord of Eleanor. It is a mad existence, Dreamer thought, when nonsense rhymes contain the only sense there is. He was about to proclaim all life meaningless when invaders stirred him to remember. The singer was the only value in a senseless universe. Against the morning sun, above the smoking ruin, rose up the glistening towers of Eleanor. Chapter 17. Death is a confirmation of the believer's creed. For the skeptic, it is discovery immense and late. Elon soared above the smoking cities. Nothing stirred. Death was universal. He gloated on his power. The rumor of the alien army was a farce. Beyond the devastated blackened earth, he saw nothing. And then his blood ran cold. In the sky ahead, in the sky where only Volcans rode, he saw a great winged horse bearing a man in armor. Beneath the flying cavalier, he saw the army. For the first time in his reign of tyranny, Elon doubted. Elon. He drew the reins on his dragon's head, and the reptile turned back across the burning ash toward the plains of man. He knew his fires had been in vain. Burning cities would not stop these aliens. He pondered their origin and feared the flying horse. He remembered the old tales that spoke of days of doom and wars of fire. His bravado ebbed. Was he emperor? Did he have Volcans? Was his city safe? He smiled upon his former fears, then glanced back. The sun of Anson's golden armor, the sun on Anson's golden armor, nearly blinded him. He heard the singing host. Raise the praise in gilded flame, till fiery letters etch the name of love across the waking universe. Singer, prince of planets, troubadour of life. His Volcan screamed, and for the moment its piercing cry blotted out the battle hymn below. Chapter 18. To break a mirror always brings 7 years of bad luck. Unless you have run out of years. The World Hater knew that Elan had discovered the invasion. The day the Hater had long anticipated could no longer be forestalled. The wound in his shoulder had not healed, and the fight would come before it could. He hurried through the back streets to the stable where his horse and armor waited. He took a large sword hanging there and placed the edge against the emery stone. He pumped the treadle and the stone revolved. The steel bled sparks. His great black horse tossed his head and snorted. He was ready for the contest that his master would soon begin. The Prince of Mirrors hated Tara and would be glad to see it burn. Still, he wondered where he would go when the object of his hate had perished in the crematorium of war. He turned the other edge of the blade upon the wheel. Again, blue sparks leaped into the dark. The door burst open, and the fugitive dreamer beheld the prince's work. "Can this be? The Prince of Mirrors preaches peace and sharpens swords. You cannot win. I left Lifeland 6 days ago. Anson's wounds have healed, and your torn flesh still gapes. The battle you began with Anson you must finish with the troubadour himself, World Hater." "Why must you use my former name?" the Prince of Mirrors said. "It is the only name you ever really had. I'll kill you, dreamer, and the world will bless me for your execution." The Hater spoke with force. "Will not Tara think it odd that he who preaches peace kills those who disobey the doctrine of the glass?" "Look!" the Dark Prince cried. "Come wear the chain and seal. Look," he repeated, pulling a mirror from his tunic. "In this glass lies the hope. Behold your face and live." Dreamer tore the mirror from the Titan hand, and the giant could not stay his force. The Hater quickly grasped the sword and sent it singing through the air. "Lower and lower you may take my head," shouted Dreamer. "But you would only have it till tomorrow, for then death itself will be forever dead, and your spell of terror will be done." Dreamer felt the inner courage of the great invader. Beware, World Hater. I have seen your adversary, and he is mighty, and your poor horse cannot withstand Light Raider. The war of fire has come. Tomorrow you begin a kind of dying, never to be dead. It is your final day, to make this world afraid. It is this world's last night. You cannot win. "I beat him once upon the wall," screamed the World Hater. "Another lie, to fit another face. You were beaten then just as you were beaten in the court of Lifeland. You wear the festered wound. Tomorrow you will lose the third and final time." The Dark Prince hated him for knowing of his defeats. His face contorted with the hatred he had masked so well in messages of love and peace. The sword blade flashed in the lantern fire. Dreamer dodged and flung the mirror. It struck the giant in the chest, toppled to the floor, and shattered. Dreamer fled into the night. "He's coming! Tomorrow!" he shouted back into the stable. The World Hater ground his teeth and threw down his sword in senseless anger. It fell into straw. He winced at the pain in his shoulder, where the wound still seeped upon his cloak. Why would the ancient wound not heal? chapter 19. The first sound sleep we ever get on earth, we must be roused one realm away. The royal road to the city of man ran through death. The singer wept as he beheld the charred etchings of city skylines. Nothing lived. The army of the liberation rode in silence. At length, the singer drew Light Raider's reins and slid from the saddle. Terra, too, rested firm upon the saddle shelf, even as the grand horse threw his head toward the sky when the troubadour dismounted. He led his horse through the carnage of Elan's infamy. As his boots moved through ashes that had once been the city of Ashorim, his foot fell against an object in the swirling ash. Around the wasted torso of a decaying corpse was the seal of Eleanor. The tiny mirror reflected only ash. Ashorim had died for him who wished to rule the universe in his own name. The soldiers closed ranks silently behind the troubadour. Their faces glistened as their eyes beheld the charred remains of depravity on Terra. When he had walked and wept, the singer mounted once again. In somber tones, he sang above the ash of Ashorim those haunting words that he had sung so long ago. They died absurdly whimpering for life. They probed their sin for rationality. Self murdered self in endless hopeless strife, and holiness slept with indecency. All birth but the prelude unto death. All birth was but the prelude unto death, and every cradle swung above a grave. The sun made weary trips from east to west. Time found no shore, and culture screamed and raved. The world in peaceless orbit sped along and waited for the singer and his song. The singer sang no more. The smoke was too intense, his tears too frequent. By noon, they passed the zone of ashes and moved on toward the capital of Eleanor. In an instant, Ansan soared low above the troops and cried, "Volcans!" He then flew on ahead. The army halted and watched the skies. The evil shadows passed at stupefying speed. Thin fire was everywhere. The flames scorched the earth about their feet, then fled. It blazed on each knight's armor, and yet it did not burn. The army cheered and soon paid little heed to falling fire. Their eyes were turned to the skies where Ansand and Invictus sped to halt the flying dragons. Ansand drew his sword to face the largest Volcan. Invictrix maneuvered quickly, and in the first pass, Ansand's blade cut one talon from the beast. The severed claw, still grasping its canister of death, impacted on the ground and scattered flame. The wounded Volcan lunged forward. Invictus flew at angles till the sword of Ansand was beneath the Volcan's scaly abdomen. He drove his giant blade between the armored plates. The dragon's blood rained down upon the field below, and then the dying reptile plunged into the firestorm it had created. Ansand felt a crushing jolt. The huge talons of a second beast lifted him to stare upon its ugly head. A shaft of pain shot through him where the dragon grasped his shoulder. The gaping jaws were open to devour him. As he passed the giant eye, he plunged his sword into the mirrored surface. The eye split open. The Volcan screamed and dropped to the golden night. Invictrix broke his fall by flying underneath him in midair. The Volcan writhed as once again Ansan drove his sword between the armored underplates. The second shrieking beast fell to the fiery earth. 2 Volcans yet remained. One, sensing danger, flew away, but Invictrix overtook it, preventing its escape. The Volcan, still carrying 1 canister of ore, hurled it against the harness of the flying horse. A fiery sphere engulfed both steed and rider. The light paralyzed the knight for a moment, and again the Volcan tried escape. Then the globe of flame shattered as Invictrix bounded into clear sky. In a spectacular maneuver, Ansan leapt from Invictrix and dropped to stride the back plates of the dragon. The beating of the scaly leather wings was deafening, yet no matter how the Volcan tried, it could not wrench the knight from its back. Ansan poised his sword at what appeared to be a set of shoulder blades. He plunged the blade between them, and the dragon screamed and died aloft. Ansan leaped into the air and once more alighted in the saddle of his steed. The final beast, bewildered by the rapid death of the others, prepared to throw its last remaining charge of ore. Ansan flew directly at its face and swung his sword down through the canister the Volcan held. It exploded, and the searing flash enveloped both knight and dragon. Invictrix passed unhurt through the bright circumference of fire, but the reptile fell, its burning hulk colliding hard with earth. The army of the Liberation, still in battle columns, cheered and sang. Then came Ansan in skies filled with fire and faced the great dragons of hate. In the fiery world where the battle unfurled, their flight came too little and late. Ansan the Golden has brandished his light, and the beasts of war have not fled. Fire burns on his sword, and the Black Knight shall die where his dragons have bled. And then they sang the magnificent hymn of the hosts. Warfare comes to the plains of man. Terror soon shall pass away. Grandeur to the troubadour. Raise the praise in gilded flame, till fiery letters etch the name of love across the waking universe. Singer, Prince of Planets, Troubadour of Life. Chapter 20. The sky is falling, said Henny Penny. No, poor bird, it only seems that way when the earth is rising to higher levels of righteousness and love. Elan could not believe it. 4 Volcans had perished in the encounter. In the days that remained, he had to mobilize his legions. They were at battle stations on the plains of Man, facing the east in numbers so abundant that their armor seemed a silver ribbon around the walls. Alert, the soldiers waited and watched the road to catch sight of the alien horde. They scanned the skies to catch a glimpse of Ansan's horse, but the bleak day ended and nothing yet was visible. The 3 remaining Volcans had been busy carrying the canisters of ore from the crystal range to the central armory, well inside the city of Man. It was clear to Elan that the capital was the destination of the Singer's troops and the likely site of conflict. When all the ore had been transported, the Volcans perched on the eastern wall above the troops of Eleanor like a crown of evil on a doomed city. Fear gnawed the capital. The city had been sealed. The gates were bolted and the drawbridge drawn. Inside the city, those who wore the chain and seal heard rumors that an alien army stretched around the planet. Who were they? Where was their kingdom? Who were the flying knight and the singing general? And most plaguing of all, why could Volcans not destroy him? The Singarians inside the city were jubilant. "He comes," they said as they met each other in the dismal streets. At the beginning of the second day, while the soldiers gathered in the formation on the plains, the Prince of Mirrors rode through the streets. For the first time he was on his horse. He wore a helm, breastplate, and sword. His eyes searched every crowd he met. He sought but could not find Dreamer. The death stallion, a black steed who matched the giant's hulk, was ominous. "Dreamer is in the city," the Prince of Mirrors said to Elan, who showed small concern. "Elan, he has escaped your mine in the Crystal Mountains and has crossed the steppes of Vaj and Thade on foot. He is here now in the capital, telling everyone of the military exploits of the singer and his knights. He is preaching in the streets that Eleanor will perish in the war fire. He dismays those who wear the seal and chain. He cries that all must now repudiate the doctrine of the glass." Elan sensed the fury in the voice. "His bleak words," continued the Black Knight, "set the city in dismal doubt about your ability to defend it. Let us now impound all Singarians not already in our prisons and put them to death." "It is the only way," agreed Elan, somewhat absently. "Now!" demanded the Dark Prince. "Yes, now. There's very little time," Elan said. The Prince of Mirrors rode to the armory and made the announcement. The sentries arrested everyone who did not wear the chain. Singarians were ferreted from homes and alleyways and placed in an old building near the armory. The Prince of Mirrors watched the arrest but still did not see Dreamer. When all had been collected, the hater rode his horse through the guarded doorway of the temporary compound. When they saw him in their midst, the Singarians began to chant, "He comes, he comes, he comes." Their voices grew in volume till the Black Prince could not stand the roar. Then they began the chorus. "The Prince of Dragons soon must fall before the Prince of Planets." The world hater had no tolerance for their music. He had heard it through too many centuries. He once had hoped to grind the music into silence. Now the hour was late, and the music rose around him with foreboding. The death stallion pranced uneasily amid the mob. The Prince of Mirrors reined the horse so sharply that it reared into the air and wheeled upon its haunches. He swung his long sword in each direction, and the hooves of his steed fell again and again. The brandished blade cut indiscriminately. Then quickly he departed. Dreamer had been arrested with the others, yet he had not been discovered by the Dark Prince. From the shadows of the makeshift prison, he beheld the massacre and wept. He embraced an old and dying woman, careless of the gore clotted on her wrinkled face. "He comes," he said to her. "He comes," she said through pain. Her smile froze into silence. The invaders swirled hope through the darkened room like hurricanes of light. His brilliance pushed back the gloom. Joy washed down their faces. "He comes!" they cried. The dead were moved to the center of the room as the Singarians voiced the words of the finale they had left too long unsung. "He comes in power. Rejoice. The hour of jubilee is near. Lift up the cry before we die. Our singer will appear." chapter 21. Take your visions. Give me photographs. The book of visions always has blank pages, for the mystics never can agree on exactly what they saw. The album's filled with photographs where lens and light and silver nitrate record the moments as they were. A steady light may be observed. A flash, however brilliant, is debated. 3 hours before the dawn, the stone face of the prison house crumbled. The roof blew away. The prisoners stood at once to their feet. Through the devastated walls, they saw the starry sky. One star began to grow, flooding the sleeping city with its light. It settled ever closer until it came into their very midst. "He is here!" shouted Dreamer. The glare softened into friendly incandescence, and then into a glow. Invader had gathered the harsh light around him and swirled it ever faster until the two great lights converged in a blinding supernova, then softened once again. A great horse emerged from the brilliance, and the troubadour dismounted. The prisoners fell on their faces. The singer, with one hand, held Light Raider's reins, and with the other palm, he lifted up the face of a young man. "It is over," he smiled. "I have come." The lad leapt upright and embraced the troubadour. The singer threw his arms around the youth and kissed him. An older child ran to embrace the pair. At once the assemblage converged upon the trio. Their joy was immense. Dreamer had never been so happy. The long-awaited prince had come. Then Dreamer saw the woman who had died in his arms. She was alive and reaching to the troubadour. So were all who had been slain. The singer knew the old woman as he knew them all. He walked to her. "Will I ever have to die again? It was so. I know how it is to die," he smiled. "The dying is over now." "Come with me," the singer called out to the other prisoners. They followed him outside. The sentries looked yet never saw them. Light Raider and the singer led them through the streets. Invader's light moved ahead of them. The streets were swelled with people from each quarter of the city. Singarians came, smiling, running, dancing through the gates. There were many in the streets, and yet the army of Eleanor did not rise to quell the unseen midnight riot. Near the gates, the troubadour swung back into his saddle. Invader's light glinted from his crown, and he raised his sword point to the city gates. The gates opened, and the drawbridge lowered itself across the moat. The liberated prisoners sang boldly and advanced through the gates. Even as they passed Elan's troops, they sang without fear. The sleeping Volcans never noticed them or heard their songs. The golden age has dawned upon the grave of time, and we are free. We lay aside the chains of our humanity. The singer comes to save the remnant of the age. The gates fling wide. The banner waves above the troubadour of life astride a steed of light. He comes! He comes! The blind can see. The halt march perfectly. The prisoners are free. He comes, he comes, he comes. Lift his name. His universal love spread majesty and light above the stars, for we are free. The army of liberation heard the captives singing, and the soldiers erupted in an anthem of their own. The realms met. Lifeland and Terra at last were one. In the daisied meadow, soon to be a blazing field of war, the liberators and the liberated sang as one. Raise the praise in gilded flame till fiery letters etch the name of love across the waking universe. Singer, prince of planets, troubadour of life. And the spectacle of life began. The army of liberation fell upon their faces as the troubadour approached. The liberated captives, too, bowed themselves to the ground. The singer sat resplendent on his horse and looked upon the union of the ages. He lifted up his glittering sword to the great glass chair so many light years distant. Father Spirit, he cried into the night sky, it is done. They are yours, Earthmaker, the magnificent. These are the evidence that only faith is sane, and never more shall freedom wear a chain. Hate is vanquished. Joy has won. Now ends the flight of Terra One, and Terra too shall fly the newer sky in love. While every knight knelt, Terra too rose gently in the air from the shelf before the saddle. There boomed above the plain a gallant chorus rising somewhere deep in space. It was an old, old song, and the tune reached hauntingly again to touch the Father's face. And Terra too began to grow. It spun in midair, rose high above Light Raider as the star song echoed through the galaxies. The melody fell upward into joy and climbed its way. In the spangled rhapsody, Earthmaker's infant stars adored his boy and blazed his name in every galaxy. The plains of Eleanor were suddenly baptized in a golden incandescence nearly as luminous as that which lit the azure plain of Lifeland. Each of the newly liberated fell in double columns that flanked a blinding aisle down which the singer passed. Dreamer found himself in the long column on the right. He waited till the troubadour passed in front of him. Like others who preceded him in the column, he knelt. The great sword touched his shoulders, and the cool blade on his naked flesh was the confirmation that he was now part of the army of liberation. When the singer had passed, Dreamer stood with the firmness of a victor. He stiffened with military air when he realized he was dressed like all the other soldiers. The silver mail hung upon his arms and shoulders. The symbol of the singer was raised in bronze relief above his breastplate. His sword lay flat within the scabbard that rested against the greaves, and his gauntlets were tucked behind his studded belt. What had happened to the woolen rags he had worn only moments before? He didn't know, but he wore the new dignity well. He knew that tomorrow he would fight the war of fire. His hand rested firmly upon his sword, and he smiled. And I'm going to stop here for right now. We will continue in just a bit. Chapter 22. Light is never given while we fear the dark. When dawn came, the army of liberation drew their swords and began the advance. They marched in silence toward the enemy columns stationed by the wall. Elan, in the saddle of a Vulcan, laden with the ore of death, advanced to meet the enemy. His bridled reptile released the canisters. Fire fell everywhere. But the army of liberation marched on. Elan feared. The unbridled Vulcans flew again to the armory and returned to hurl more fire. The heat grew so intense the forests near the plains of Man ignited. Sheets of flame swept in waves across the land and licked the base of the fortress walls. It looked as if the entire globe would burn. Elan made a tactical error. He decided that the singer must be killed to stop the onslaught. Astride the great dragon, Elan dived toward Light Raider, who did not bolt. Giant claws grasped for the troubadour, but could not sweep him from his horse. Then suddenly the Vulcan looked toward the sky and screamed. Ansan closed on him. The Golden Knight recalled a ploy he had used in earlier attacks and sliced through the canister which Elan's dragon grasped. Fire engulfed both beast and rider. As the saddle girth collapsed and the searing flame rushed over him, Elan wailed in terror. In separate moments, yet almost one, Emperor and Vulcan hit the earth. Two Vulcans remained. One wheeled and confronted winged Invictrix in the air. Wildly, its 6 great talons ripped the air. Invictrix barely kept beyond the reach of all its savage claws. Each way the horse flew, the beast turned in the air to face Ansand and the fight. The roaring Vulcan almost deafened those below. The reptile opened its deadly jaws to grasp the horse's wings. Below the screaming skies, the battle ranks began to close. Along 100-mile front, sword clashed on shield. The wail of dying men continued through the day. Above the din of war echoed the cries of dragons in the air. By afternoon, the Vulcan had begun to tire. Invictrix circled it until the sun fell full into the monster's face. The reptile's glazed eyes spoke its death ahead of time. Its wing beats slowed, and finally it settled toward the earth. It could not rise, although it longed to do so. Invictrix and her rider watched the beast descend. It hovered for a moment above the thickest combat. Then fell the few remaining feet. The men of Eleanor moved back to give the dragon dying space. Its great leather wings fluttered like a crippled gull. Its claws dug into the bloody earth among the corpses of the fallen soldiers. It whimpered, groaned, and gasped, then died. The dragon's slow, painful death unnerved the men of Eleanor. They had reason to fear. Elan was dead. Terra was aflame, and the fire had spread to the capital. The gates were now ablaze. Ansan turned to the final Vulcan. The beast, knowing it was the last, had lost its heart for war. It would not fly. It perched like a great stone gargoyle on the palace armory, where the canisters of death ore were stacked in pyramids. As Invictrix flew close, the Vulcan toppled backward, scattering the deadly piles. It could not fold its wings. Spasms shook its ugly head. Froth poured above its forked tongue. Seized by desire to end its existence, it brought a merciful conclusion to the war. Grasping a canister, the Vulcan tore the frail shell until it burst. In an instant, fire shot high. The whole armory detonated. Flame, growing in intensity, collected in a golden ball and settled on the city. Terra was ablaze. Hate's final grudge against Earthmaker's love was Holocaust. Dreamer, turned Avenger, struggled to find the Prince of Mirrors in the burning city. He was confused by all the flame. The streets were filled with the fallen, and the buildings were in ruins. He sought the stable where the Dark Prince had sharpened his weapon for the conflict. A cloud of dense smoke blew across the small lane where Dreamer walked. A burning timber crashed ahead of him and exploded in a shower of sparks whose light was smothered by soot and darkness. He fought the smoke, and shielding his face against the heat, he stumbled through the hot mist. When Dreamer drew his arm back to breathe, the Prince of Mirrors stood directly in the burning way. The hater grinned and drew his sword. Chapter 23. Materiality. A blessing all its own. Spirit demons play in fire, hoping for cremation. In the terror of their immortality, they envy dying men. In the days prior to the liberation, Dreamer would have been terrified by the leering hater. Now he was amazed that the aggressor's grin left him unafraid. The hater's sword was twice the size of his, but he drew his own blade and stepped the thirsty distance to his foe. The hater swung. Then the smaller swordsman hurled his steel in a direct arc that would have hit the hater's armor. The sound of clanging steel resounded through the street. Each stalked the other. Again their blades resounded as Dreamer slowly weakened. Suddenly Ansan bolted through the smoke, calling to the hater, "Come, leave the Dreamer. Your wounded shoulder still seeps my grudge." "Not before I finish with this miner," the Prince of Mirrors cried. He followed his defiance with a question. "Is Elan dead?" "The planet's dead," cried Ansan, "and Elan with it. He fell in flame from a slaughtered Volcan." "He died wearing my face," mused the world hater. "But no matter, I have his." "Terra died because it wore your face," Ansan interrupted. Gesturing to the flames, the hater cried, "Look, Ansan, I have laid to rest the Earthmaker's hope and smashed his finest work of art. Behold the power of hate!" He laughed. Dreamer watched the unfolding conflict. Suddenly he was dazzled by blinding intensity. Light Raider bolted through the wall of flame. Ashes formed whirlwinds beneath his hooves. The singer came. "It is your final moment," called the singer. "Perhaps," the Dark Prince said. "The planet burns and the flames spread. Perhaps the seas themselves shall erupt in flame," he laughed. "Indeed they will," the troubadour agreed. "Hate sometimes has a fiery end before it is absorbed in love." The old antagonists faced each other as the troubadour continued. "My father's spirit loved this place and the men that he made to live here. Now," he seemed choked by the declaration, "now both his world and men are gone." "I told you I would win," sneered the world hater. "I warned you at the wall. The fight was fair. Now see the ash can of your artistry." "You have not won. Look." Ansan sent his mount through the wall of flame. The fire fell back. Low in the night sky flew Terra too. It had grown since it floated upward from the saddle shelf a few hours earlier. The troubadour smiled. In only 3 hours comes the midnight of this planet. Terra 1 will die. But even as it falls, the sky will be filled with the growing hope of Terra 2. It is a world that you will never enter, World Hater. You cannot kill me, nor control me. I go to any world I wish. I once brought a civil war to Lifeland itself. Have you forgotten? The Prince of Mirrors sneered at the World Hater, at the world growing above the flames. Invictrix soared abruptly back through the flames and settled suddenly. Surprised, the Dark Prince stumbled backward and fell ingloriously to the charred ground. He looked up at Ansand, who trailed a long chain of heavy links. Light Raider pawed the earth, and it opened in an awesome rift. From the great scar, the Hater could hear the moaning from the canyon of the damned. "No! No!" cried the World Hater. The singer leapt from Light Raider. The ancient struggle began again in fury. Hate tore at love for the remaining hours. Terra 2 loomed larger and larger until it filled the sky. Close to midnight, the World Hater, in desperation, flung his sword at the troubadour. The Golden Knight now entered into the struggle. He grasped the discarded sword and wielded it to split away the Hater's torn and dented armor. Evil stood naked. Ansand knew he could not put an end to the evil prince with the sword, for they had both been made to live forever. So he took the chain and wound it round the Hater's wounded body. The Hater cursed the singer and his Golden Knight and poured his scorn on Terra 2. Dreamer beheld the final moments of the ancient struggle. The World Hater would live forever, but never move again. He would hate, but never enter Terra 2. Invictrix nudged him toward the great rift. Over and over he rolled. At the edge of the crevasse, Invictrix nudged him once more. He tumbled into the abyss and plummeted away. The ground closed. Dreamer followed Ansand and the troubadour back to the waiting army. The soldiers, like himself, were all unharmed. The war of fire was over. The singer led the army of liberation back upon the skyway. At midnight, the two worlds collided. Terra 1 split away and then dissolved. Terra 2 rolled on in youth. Chapter 24. An old astronomer clasped his protege and said, "If Polaris dies tonight, be assured some greater light will take its place." Ansand guided his mount above the mountain range. He saw the spires of the city of the troubadour, a lovely city without walls, for walls, though not forbidden, were forgotten. In worlds where evil has not come, walls never come to mind. Invictrix skimmed a sunlit tower and flew down to the plaza where the children played. The steed alighted. Ansand walked through an arched portal and saw the singer sitting with his lyre. He saw Ansand and rose to meet him. The two embraced. "Earthmaker is sovereign love," said Ansand. "The music of the universe," agreed the troubadour. Halana to the Father Spirit, cried the Golden Knight. Come with me, the singer said. They walked to the Plaza of Peace. In the center of the square, a sphere of bright, transparent glass rested on one crystal's very point. In the center of the sphere was a world about the size that Terra, too, had been the day she rode into the final battle of the War of Fire. It is Terra 1, a replica exact and scaled, the singer said. Forever sealed? Inquired Ansand. Forever, agreed the troubadour. And we can never hear the anguish from its center? The Golden Knight seemed troubled. Never. There shall be silence where the Dark Prince writhes in chains. He is small indeed to live in such a tiny world as this. He is a dwindling point of death within a growing universe of joy. Come, said the singer. They walked again. Soon they came to a grand reliquary on a distant ivory causeway. There was a cube of glass, and deep within a replica of the great machine of death. Why keep this? Ansand asked. It was the only hope of Terra 1. Those who walk this newer world are here because I chose to die down there between the gears and ropes. What was it like to die? The Golden Knight asked. Be grateful, you shall never have to know. The troubadour looked thoughtfully away. When it was over, I held a new relationship with men. Even Terra 1 died. Death does not matter. The singer gestured to the glistening world of Terra 2. Dying is not final, only life. Ansand looked at the scars of death still marking the prince's hands. You are the singer, prince, and troubadour. There was music all around them in the air. They sang the star song, and far above the crystal chair, their music drifted outward on the universe. Earthmaker viewed the sculptured dignity of man, godlike and strident, president of everything that is, content to be his intimate and only earthen friend. Alana. And that is the end of the Singer trilogy and the end of the finale. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his peace.